evening from Swansea, wrestling fans. I'm your host, Ben Allison, and you are listening to Wrestling Republic's daily broadcast, your one-stop shop for pro wrestling insight, news, and reviews on a daily basis. Today is Sunday Funday, and we're going to be doing another edition of our latest game show, Wrestling Heaven and Hell, with our contestants arguing why their wrestling loves and hates should be sent to either wrestling heaven or hell. The rules are simple. Each round, the contestants will argue why they believe their pick should be added to either wrestling heaven or hell, with me then deciding at the end which of the two gets that honor. Joining me to play the game, today we're mixing it up a little bit. It's not the usual duo of Coby and Clark, but half of that duo will be joining us, and that is the head of reviewing, Coby Galenzoski. How are you, Coby?
See, the fact of the matter is we've had the Double or Nothing quiz, and then last week was the Double or Nothing preview. So I've missed not being projected as the devil in this case, and I still have it this week, and it still is stupid. But anyway, I'm back. Hopefully I can win. I got some redemption after Clark's crap from the last time, but I'm back. I gotta get my head in the game and win this one instead.
Absolutely, the winning attitude. That is what I want to see. But this time you will not be against Clark, because joining us here for Sunday Funday, Wrestling Heaven or Hell, we have David. How are you, David?
I am good. Thank you very much. So excited to be here for my first Heaven and Hell. I've watched the show before. I'm excited to give it a shot. I think it's going to be incredible fun, and I'm in a good mood today because despite anything else that may be going on in the world, they've announced that Bryan Danielson will face Kazuchika Okada, and that has made my life complete. So I'm now in a good mood as we move in, so I can now beat Coby. It's reviewer versus reviewer. Who will come out on top?
Oh, fight and talk, that is what we like to see. And yes, Okada versus Danielson at Forbidden Door. The card is already looking way, way better than last year's. And actually, I think we're going to get into that a bit tomorrow, because we certainly need to talk about that, because it's going to be insane. But firstly, let's talk Wrestling Hell. What do you guys want to send to Wrestling Hell? What is the thing in wrestling which you hate that you want banished for all of time? Coby, I'll go to you first. What are you sending to Wrestling Hell?
So, I mean, we know what's coming is the title says who's the best Money in the Bank winner, but then there's also another specialized round with championship belt designs, which we'll get into. But another one I found for a general hell, and it's not a WWE championship that I can put in that round, but Lay Cool had the split women's championship. I mean, this entire idea was idiotic. There's no logic, no common sense. It was a championship held by two wrestlers at the same time because they wanted to share the championship. But the fact of the matter is we got this before with Jericho in China, but they didn't have to design the belt as two broken halves so they could hold half the belt on their shoulders. I mean, obviously this was a time when WWE didn't necessarily care about women's wrestling, but it was just a bad idea in general. It never played out well. That's the thing. There's belts like when Progress had their tag titles as the two yin and yang shields, and they put it together to represent the tag titles. That looks good. This was the WWE Women's Championship, literally broken, like it was ripped in half, and it looked like someone took a bite out of it. I don't know. It looked terrible. This has to go to Wrestling Hell. It has to.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, completely truthfully here, I'd actually erased that from my memory. That's how bad that was. I forgot all about that. It really did look bad. But David, what do you have to say in response to that, and what do you want to send to Wrestling Hell?
I mean, I will start with the Late Cool split women's title. It's bad. It is bad. I can't sit here and pretend that it's good. I'll be honest with you. I had a wrestling DVD when I was growing up of this era of wrestling, and I remember thinking it was quite funny when I was a little kid of having them both squabbling over the titles. I was young and I was very stupid, but I don't think that I think I can work with this, and the reason is because number one, the Late Cool run was 13 years ago, not for a particularly long period of time, and in a division that WWE did not care about in any way, sense, or form. It was we weren't long off Santina, that's where about a year off Santina. That's where the state of the division was. And we had the Piggy James nonsense and all this thing. So women's wrestling in general from that era, I would be plummeting straight to the depths of hell. But I don't necessarily think that particular thing was the worst. My addition to Wrestling Hell is a specific incident or a specific thing that kind of links to a wider problem. And the reason I think it's more interesting is because it's relevant to the modern wrestling landscape. I would like to send to hell wrestling crowds not respecting the referee's 10 count. And by that, I mean, when a wrestler is thrown to the outside and the referee is trying to do a count, he will count 1, the crowd will count 2. The referee will count 2, the crowd will chant 3, and so on. We had exactly the same thing when Ty Dillinger was active and the crowd would chant 10 through everything. Now, this may seem like a minute point, but it's part of a wider problem. And the wider problem is wrestling crowds who don't respect the fundamentals of wrestling. There's a point between like kind of going against a crowd, going against kind of booking and just trying to make their voices heard. And this is, to me, is one of the worst examples of it, because a wrestling 10 count is such a huge part of the wrestling landscape. It's such a huge part of matches, of psychology, of building a match structure. And when the crowd actively, for seemingly no reason, I've been at independent shows in terrific matches that the crowd are into, and yet they do it because they want to hear their voice, not because they're going against the company, not because they're going against the wrestlers, but just for a laugh. And it irritates me to no end, because it reaches the point where it goes from, it's no longer this is awesome, and it becomes more we are awesome. And the focus goes from from the wrestlers into the fans, and the fans can actively sabotage a match if they feel like it. And I've seen so many, close call 9 counts, things that should really get you on the edge of your seat, ruined because the crowd decide to take matters into their own hands and chant so they can get a laugh and something to go on social media. So that's why I would put fans not respecting a referee's 10 count into Wrestling Hell.
That is a very, very good point indeed. And there was a very good argument there, David. I mean, going back very quickly to the Late Cool women's belt, and that is a good point that you made, because yes, I'd have raised it from my memory, but as a kid, I did think it was funny as well. It was entertaining, but it was also at the same time cringe. Doesn't make sense. And of course, it doesn't make sense 2 people holding a singles championship anyway. So I do hate that completely. I mean, we've been speaking for months about how on earth we can get, the WWE championship on Montez Ford. Well, how about we split it in half and give it to both of the Street Profits? That would be the solution. No, but that is bad. But then when we go over to, fans basically hijacking matches, that really, really does suck. It truly does. And the point that you made about, a 9 count, that should be a really tense moment. You're like, is this going to be the ending of the match? Instead, they're just chanting 10 or whatever. They're already on the next one. And it's just like, yeah, some crowds do just like to hear their own voice. So I've got my lever here for the day. As always, each episode I use a different object as the lever, because our budget's still too low at this point to get a proper lever. And today it's a box of celebrations, right? But the question is, which one is going to go there? And like I said, the Late Cool women's belt, as a kid, I found it entertaining, but the concept sucked. Yes, a lot of the women's division stuff at that time was booked awfully. And a lot of that, like you touched upon, David, should be in Wrestling Hell. But also, of course, the fans hijacking matches, that's no fun for anybody. But 2 women holding a singles belt, that just can't happen. So that is what I'm sending to Wrestling Hell. And that is the first round of the day completed. Round 1 goes to Coby. Now on to round 2. And round 2 is a specialized round, and we're talking Money in the Bank. Of course, Money in the Bank will take place, I believe, it's either a week today or a month yesterday, and will be taking place from London. I will be there, Chaos will be there, and we'll be sure to get some content for you at Wrestling Republic. But round 2 is Wrestling Heaven, and is who is the best Money in the Bank winner of all time. So which Money in the Bank winner and Money in the Bank run would you like to send to Wrestling Heaven? David, I'll start with you this time.
I mean, there are plenty of good Money in the Bank holders that you could mention in this sort of category. I would like to send to Wrestling Heaven for the best Money in the Bank winner, the very first Money in the Bank winner, the Rated R Superstar. That is Edge. Obviously had 2 runs with the Money in the Bank briefcase. The second one, he didn't win it in the scheduled match, but he beat Mr. Kennedy to take the belt. The reason I am going to vouch for Edge is purely because I think the fabric of Money in the Bank is so heavily ingrained with his character. I think that obviously Chris Jericho was apparently very instrumental in getting the match made, but I think without Edge, a lot of the fundamentals of the Money in the Bank concept that are still being used, it's 18 years later, are so ingrained with Edge. The idea of, the story goes, Edge was the person who came up with the idea of a heel cashing in on an injured face, which is how Edge won the belt from Cena the first time round. The idea of the ultimate opportunist feeling so ingrained in that gimmick, the iconic visual of Edge thrusting the Money in the Bank into Vince McMahon's hand, that purely evil kind of gimmick. And I think of everyone who's ever held the Money in the Bank briefcase, I think Edge is the person who I feel is most synonymous with it, and I feel best suits that idea that carried with Money in the Bank, because Edge held Money in the Bank for so long. We're not in the women's Money in the Banks now where they cash him in on the same day. He held it almost the whole year and let the anticipation build and build and build and build, and then I think catapulted himself right into that main event conversation by purely having the intuition to know to do something different, to cash in when fans weren't expecting him to cash in. And it's such an iconic moment, and I think that for that, I think that Edge is the best Money in the Bank holder of all time.
Wow. I mean, you are certainly correct. That's what really propelled him into that main event scene, and that created the Edge that we know and love today. Even though today, nowadays he's a babyface, but without that Money in the Bank run, who knows if he'd ever have been, that level of a legend. But Coby, what do you have to say about that? And which Money in the Bank winner do you want to send to Wrestling Heaven?
I mean, it's obvious that doesn't belong in Wrestling Heaven. He botched Tony Chimmel's introduction for the Rated R Superstar over here. Like, we got to be honest, that was not good. That was a voice crack. I mean, and then keep in mind, the second Money in the Bank, his second Money in the Bank reign was when he beat Mr. Kennedy for it, and then of course did the same thing, cashed in on an injured heel. I mean, this isn't the one I have in mind. Is another very early one, and it kind of shows the exact opposite of what the Money in the Bank can be used for. So the one that comes to mind, which is not Seth Rollins, because that is a very good guess, and that's a very synonymous moment. The second one I have is the second winner of the Money in the Bank briefcase. That is Mr. Rob Van Dam. So not only did he win it the second time, he won it essentially sandwiched between Edge Edge's reigns, because Edge and Mr. Kennedy, but Kennedy lost it to Edge. RVD did the opposite. He was the first person to kind of announce a cash-in, and he did it as a smart face, because not only did he cash in, he announced the cash in for a pay-per-view called ECW One Night Stand. And for someone to announce a cash in, they got to be confident. They got to be aware of the atmosphere that it's going to hold at the end of the day. And the Hammerstein Ballroom truly was that. No other wrestling crowd would have been better for RVD to get that crowning moment, to defeat John Cena, which it's an incredible moment. And everyone looks back at it as like, oh, this was the one time people would not stand the sight of John Cena in a wrestling ring. Because John Cena was the heel in that situation, right? And it's an interesting thing. But RVD not only was innovative with the Money in the Bank very early on, because of the fact that it was a brand new concept, it was the second reign, but he announced his cash in. He didn't have to not rely on attacking an injured face and being that ultimate opportunist. He truly sat there and reflected and said, this is the right time to cash in. I got to announce it for this. I want the match at this night with this crowd at this time of day. And that's what makes it a very historic and synonymous Money in the Bank reign that we often have.
Absolutely.
And often relive.
That's true. A lot of people have followed in his footsteps and announced their cash-ins ahead of time. But David, do you have any response to that?
My only response to that would be, I agree. I love Rob Van Dam's cash-in, and the match with Cena is great. My only thing is, I don't think Rob Van Dam went any higher. I think the one night in WWE, I think the one night stand match he had was where he hit his peak, and then obviously he was undone by drugs. And whilst you can argue that perhaps the aftermath of Edge's first cash in, you know, his run with that belt wasn't especially long. He kept getting higher, and he won more, and he won more, and he won more. So the Money in the Bank concept launched Edge higher. I think the Money in the Bank concept got RVD to a certain point, but then we went no further, and that was about the extent of his powers. And then he just fell back and fell back and fell back, and it's frustrating. Whether that's the Money in the Bank's fault or not, maybe not. But when you're looking, if you're comparing the two, I think both have quite similar trajectories. But I think Edge's was the start of something bigger, whereas RVD kind of peaked.
Oh.
But the thing that comes to mind is what actually happened is we have someone like this is synonymous. RVD had his championship reign, and then it didn't necessarily end, but his push was halted because of drug issues, and that's something that does suck, and it exists in wrestling. But that's the thing. Who says this Money in the Bank doesn't take him higher in a different universe when that doesn't happen? Something unfortunate happened, and yes, it happened, but you can't put fault on the Money in the Bank cash-in in the moment because of events that happened after.
Thing is, that universe doesn't exist.
Oh,
as much as we want it to, and as much as I want it to, that universe doesn't exist. So what we have to look at is the reigns that we did get, and the legacy that they do look back on. And I think that RVD that my memory of that match is the crowd more than anything that Edge does in that match. So more than anything that RVD does in that match, my memory is the crowd. And also one of the biggest pops in that match comes from Edge, who interferes. So and obviously that pop wouldn't have been as big if it was somebody other than RVD. But with Edge, I think there's more I have more physical iconography of things that he does, not necessarily the things that go around him with regards to that reign.
Those are two very good points from both of you there. Yes, RVD, of course, that moment, that cash in, that was excellent, right? In terms of feel-good moments, that was certainly one. It could have elevated him a lot higher, but of course it got halted. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the Money in the Bank reign itself, but you can argue in hindsight when looking back at it, the Money in the Bank technically did do more for Edge. It did. But if, not in that universe, would that be the case? Who knows? We've got Bailey in the comments over on YouTube saying both are good arguments, but I'd say Baron Corbin.
He failed to cash in on Jinder Mahal. That's all that needs to be said.
WWE.
Now let's get it up, right? Let's get the lever, aka the boxer celebrations out, and let me wrap things up. RVD, great cash in. Edge, great cash in. But when we look back and we look at the Money in the Bank briefcase, you think of one man, a man. A lot of persons think of one man, and that man is Edge. So Edge, his Money in the Bank cash in is being sent to Wrestling Heaven, and David, you get 1 point on the scoreboard, making it 1-1 heading into round 3. And round 3, we are going down to the deep depths of hell once again to talk about the worst WWE Championship design in history. And of course, this week, the new WWE Undisputed Universal Championship was revealed. Some people hated it, some people loved it. However, when talking about the worst WWE Championship design, for the sake of this conversation, I've decided the rule to be it can be any championship as long as it ended up merging with the WWE Championship, right? So that can feature the big gold belt. Although if anybody was to say that, I'd be very shocked why you'd argue that's the worst. But it could be anything going in which is merged with the WWE Championship to now become the WWE Undisputed Universal title, which is too long of a name. But which is the worst championship design? Kobe, I will go to you first. What do you think is the worst WWE Championship design which should be sent to Wrestling Hell?
So, I mean, a lot of things come in mind, and a lot of people, when talking about historic reigns like Roman's historical 1,000-day reign, people refer to Bruno Sammartino. People refer to Bob Backlund. And at the end of the day, as much as the big gold belt is prestigious and one of the most beautiful belts of the past, this is very much the big gold's idiotic little brother. Used in 1978 to 1985, it was Bob Backlund's big green belt. It was a huge green strap. As much as the circular plate was all right, it didn't have a lot of defining moments. It's similar to the big gold belt as it's just a lot. It's a piece of gold with a lot of engraving in it. That's hard to see. But the fact of the matter is they had 10 side plates around the straps. It made the belt double the thickness, or not double the thickness, double the size. It made it bulkier. It made it just entirely ugly. Yes, it was a good idea to show the lineage of the championship on the side plates, but in actuality, it was just poorly executed for the WWF Heavyweight Championship.
Great point. And I think that is one of the belts which is, it's criticized a lot within professional wrestling when talking about, something, WWE Championship. And we've got Chaos over in the comments in the 24/7 Championship for sure. That didn't merge with the WWE Championship itself. But if we're talking all WWE belts, yeah, I'd agree with you, Chaos. But technically for this argument, that would not count. But David, what belt are you trying to send to the deep depths of hell?
Oh, there were so many options. Well, it's only when you go back and look at some of the status, some of these titles, that you think, crikey Moses. The big green belt is not great. I don't actually hate it. I'll be honest with you. It's not one I'm especially familiar with. I've just had to do a quick Google search to make sure I was talking about the right belt. But but it's a clumsy belt, but I've seen worse. I mean, the lineage, it's a bulky strap, but it is nice to see it is nice to see the lineage. It feels like a sports belt. The central plate isn't terrible. I very nearly sent the Fiend's custom universal title to hell because it looks horrid. But it wasn't. It was only around for a very short period, and then they wisely scrapped it. So I chose to include, along the same lineage, I would like to send to Wrestling Hell the original red design of the Universal Championship. And the specific reason why I have selected this belt is because this morning I put on Finn Balor versus Seth Rollins from SummerSlam, I believe it was 2016, when the belt was unveiled. And you would be amazed at how good that match was, if you've never seen it, how good that match was by the reaction of the crowd, because the entire crowd do not care about the 25-minute match going on between Finn Balor and Seth Rollins. All they are doing is laughing and pointing and jeering at the state of the world title. It looks like a toy title that somebody has smeared with Hartley's jam, UK reference there, has just smeared it with jam and then thrown it on and gone, there you go, that's your belt, taken in 3 seconds. The red leather is really, really just not particularly pleasant to look at. And if your belt is introduced by Mick Foley and the crowd and the wrestlers have to go to Twitter to complain about how much the crowd ruined their match purely because of the state of a title, then I think that for me is the defining legacy of the Universal Championship, of the red design. I don't hate the blue as much. I think it looks slightly more appealing, and of course that has the link memories to Roman. But the red title, when I think of the red title, that is what I think of, is of a title of not anybody who ever held it. I just remember watching a crowd completely destroy a title on its first night. And when your title is seen as a laughing stock from the beginning, you've got nowhere to go. I think it's a nasty belt, and yeah, I don't like it at all. But there were plenty to choose from.
I'm muted. Sorry, that is a great point, because they really did hijack that match. We spoke really about fans hijacking a match. Well, this was something which WWE could control, because it certainly wasn't a good look of a belt, and it ruined that match, and it ruined such a good. It was a dream match between Rollins and Balor. Obviously, unfortunately, Balor got hurt during it, but it was not great. But over in the comments, we got LW Plays saying they think the Rated R Spinner title should go to Wrestling Hell, whereas Bailey thinks the Brahma Bull belt is worse. But the Rated R is bad as well.
I should say I would have considered the Brahma Bull belt. It never actually made it to television, I don't believe. So I chose not to count it because it was never on TV, so it didn't have that much of an impact. It just looked horrid. It just looks silly. But Rated R Spinner, yes, it's awful.
Kobe, do you have any response to the Universal Championship possibly going to Wrestling Hell?
I think the biggest thing that can be said with the Universal title is, in actuality, the first how many months, and up until Roman Reigns' championship reign, the application of the entire title is garbage. We had Finn Balor have to do that. Then we had Kevin Owens win it. The reign was not memorable. It was memorable for his work with Chris Jericho. And then he dropped it to Goldberg. Then Goldberg dropped it to Brock. And then that lasted how long? And then Roman won it. And then there was just a lot of things that happened with the Universal Championship. And then all of a sudden, Bray Wyatt wins it and it turns blue because he got drafted to SmackDown. I think the universe, like, that's the thing. Aside from the 1,000-day reign with Roman Reigns, the Universal Championship is remembered not because of the first inaugural match. It's remembered just because of the horrible championship reigns, where at least, I mean, it's weird. It's entirely weird that it just does suck in that general aspect.
I will say though, at the time that first match happened, I grant you that those years were dismal. But at the time the first match happened, the fans in that building didn't know where we were going. You know, they didn't see Brock. They just saw the title and went boo. And so I agree that the title was booked extremely poorly. I think it's a very difficult comparison because we're talking about a title from 2016 through to 2019 against a title from the 70s. Did you say the 1970s?
78, 85.
You know, where I don't think, you know, I certainly have not watched a great deal of wrestling from 1973 to 1985. So it's hard for me to kind of compare what the state of the title was like at the time because I'm not especially sure. So I can only go off the pictures that I can see. But I think the Universal title run was bad. But like I said, the people at the time didn't know that. They just saw a belt and laughed it out of the stadium.
Both are very, very good points from both of you there. I mean, the big green belt, it doesn't look that visually appealing. I'm personally never a fan of green belts, full stop. I mean, me and Clark regularly argue about the boxing championship, which is green, which Clark says is his favorite championship belt of all time. I personally really don't like it. I'm not a fan of green belts at all, but it just looks a bit bland. It does, but at the same time, you've got to look at it and say, well, hang on a second. I mean, this is 40 years ago, over 40 years ago, technically. So that's also got to be taken into consideration a bit. But something which was not 40 years ago and was only what? Now,
7.
You're making me do math. 7 years. Yeah, 7 years ago. That is the Universal Championship. And like you touched upon, David, the fans hijacked that match. That belt ruined a dream match between Seth Rollins and Finn Balor. I remember when they did the brand split and Raw got a new look. And we found out at the end of the first episode that it would be Finn Balor, who'd just been called up from NXT, against Seth Rollins for the new championship at SummerSlam. I was so excited for that match. I was excited to see this new Universal Championship. I remember seeing all these concept belts posted on Instagram of people being like, well, this is what it should look like. And I was so excited to see it. I stayed up late. I invited my friends over to the house. And it was just a red version of the WWE belt. And it did not look great at all. So for that reason, the red Universal Championship belt is going to wrestling. But now, guys, let's move on to the fourth and final round. Is currently 2-1 with David taking the lead. But now let's move on to round 4, which is Wrestling Heaven. We're going back to Heaven, and this is a general round where the contestants can pick either. So it's up to them. Anything that they want to pick doesn't have to be related to belts, doesn't have to be related to Money in the Bank, anything. But what is one thing within professional wrestling that you want to send to Wrestling Heaven, David?
So I'm very excited to talk about this. This is a very, very personal selection, but it is my favorite thing that WWE have ever done. My entry to Wrestling Heaven is the Firefly Funhouse match from WrestleMania 36, Night 2. The reason why I'm specifically on this match, beyond the fact that I adore it immensely, is that I think having something in Wrestling Heaven, it's all well and good to talk about really good professional wrestling matches. We could come on every week and talk about great wrestling matches and put them into Heaven, because there are hundreds of them. You will never see anything like this in professional wrestling again, I don't think. I think this was a combination of time, of talent, of situation, of WWE having their backs against the wall. I guarantee you, if WrestleMania had been in front of a crowd, this match would not have, I can't even call it a match because it wasn't. This entity, this thing, would not have ended, would not have made it to television. It would have been a straightforward singles match of The Fiend probably murdering John Cena, and it would have been fine. But the fact that we were in a pandemic, it was such a weird time, and I have seen the Firefly Funhouse match well over 20 times. Every time I see it, I find new things in it. I think I still can't believe that WWE and Vince McMahon signed off on Bray Wyatt burying their biggest star of 10 years. He was at a point where it wouldn't have hurt him, of course, but some of the stuff that was said in there felt edgy, it felt different. And the fact is, a lot of casual fans kind of tuned out during that empty arena wrestling. So it really felt like we were getting something for wrestling fans who knew the lore, that knew the story. It felt like the greatest gift that John Cena could give somebody like Bray Wyatt, especially after Mania 30. It was visually inventive. It was scary in places. The references were incredibly fun. I can gush about the match, about the segment in general for ages. But the reason why I specifically want this in Wrestling Heaven is because of just how different I think it is to anything that's come before it and anything that I think will come after it. And it's such a lightning in a bottle kind of work of out there and creative genius from both guys that I think that, creativity should be rewarded. And that is why, I would put The Fiend versus John Cena from WrestleMania 36 Firefly Funhouse match into Wrestling Heaven, where I think it belongs for life.
Wow, you've really sold me on that one. You truly have. But there is one little thing that I want to point out, and I want to plug Wrestling Republic's Eric Novak's All Real Wrestling podcast, because he recently did an interview with Fred Rosser, formerly known in WWE as Darren Young, and he revealed that originally the plan for the Firefly Funhouse, when it was going to be at WrestleMania in front of a crowd, was for it to be a similar thing. But I'm not sure how they would do it, if still elements of it would be cinematic or whatever. But the Nexus were going to appear as like a part of John Cena's past. So they were clearly going to do something similar to that if it was in person. But I do agree. I don't feel like it would have been as good as the way that it was in a pandemic, a closed doors WrestleMania, because you can get away with that stuff more. And it really was a super fun, I guess, segment. I'd be more inclined to call it rather than a match. But what about you, Kobe? What do you want to send to Wrestling Heaven? And what were your thoughts on the Firefly Funhouse match?
I think the biggest thing is, yes, it's storyline genius, and the editing and everything that was put into it was, I don't want to say the brainchild of one specific person, because obviously WWE has their producers and have the people who created it, and it was a brainchild of multiple people that I have to do the research to know who it was. The one thing that I have to say that is a very negative aspect towards the Firefly Funhouse is it was filled with the past. For someone who is just tuning in, and this is a big issue that, me and Ben will talk about, and me and Ben speak about, not frequently, but we'll speak about when talking about issues with AEW, is they act like people know the history and know why this match is happening, know the reasoning behind it. A lot of the imagery and a lot of the stuff within the Firefly Funhouse, to someone like us, to the hardcore fan, to the person who knows the story and knows the past of the NWO and all that, it's good for them. It's not good for the casual fan who just saw essentially a lot of just editing. And it was, at the end of the day, if someone is not a wrestling fan who has the smarts, who has the knowledge of the history, that is that's a weird vignette at the end of the day. I don't want to say I'm cheating with the one I thought of, and it is somewhat indirectly related to the upcoming Money in the Bank pay-per-views. But something that people who watched independent professional wrestling know, and it was never really, it hasn't been capitalized in so long up until now, but I want to put into the general Wrestling Heaven, the UK wrestling crowds. Those are the magical crowds that you can see. We saw it in independent professional wrestling for the last 10, 15 years. And just now, with Clash at the Castle, with Money in the Bank, with All In, wrestling companies are now going to capitalize on the fact that those crowds are not I don't want to say once in a lifetime, but those crowds are where magic can happen. We saw the enormous reactions from Sheamus. We saw the Drew McIntyre ovation for Broken Dreams and him in general. The United Kingdom wrestling crowds are just that gem that we're truly starting to see come out with companies like WWE doing international shows, like going to Puerto Rico, and the Saudi Arabian crowds are often really, really as good as well. But the UK wrestling crowd took 20 years to be capitalized on once again, and it's just it's a magical thing for people in attendance and people that are watching a show that took place in the UK.
Both great arguments. We've kind of come full circle this episode because, of course, David, your point earlier on about you mentioned independent shows that you've been to doing the counting when the referees are doing their own count. And of course, last UK crowds, you criticized them slightly at the start of the show. Now Coby is praising them. Both very, very good points. I mean, David, do you have a quick response to what Coby said?
I'll give you a quick response and to say that UK crowds are great. I have two very quick points. First point to make is that as I said earlier, and as we pointed out, UK fans do love the sound of their own voice. I think back to Clash at the Castle, where they kind of hijacked the 6-woman tag to continually chant "Hey Bailey" when Bailey was trying to play a heel, and you could see it really wound her up. That's one point. It's a minor point, but it's a point. The other point is you mentioned Puerto Rico, you mentioned Saudi Arabia, you mentioned we're going to get India, I think that these amazing reactions, while the UK codes are great, we've just had, I think, an even bigger reaction in Puerto Rico, which I think points to a love of international crowds rather than specifically the UK crowds. You could say the same thing, in the UK. France was amazing when they went there. It's an international market. But the reason why I'm just pushing so heavily for the Firefly Funhouse is you will never find anything like it again. If you took away UK crowds, you'd find great wrestling crowds elsewhere. You'd find them in Puerto Rico, you'd find them in Saudi Arabia, you'd find them in Europe, you'd find them all over the world, in America even, Chicago. If you take away the Firefly Funhouse match, I don't know if there's a combination of forces that will get you that again without those people involved, which is why I pushed for that specific entity.
That is a brilliant argument, brilliant response there, and this is one which I really have to think about. Really, Coby, I've heard you both. I've heard you both. And
the one thing that I understand. Yes, we've talked about this where you mentioned it. We don't know if there's a universe where RVD doesn't have a situational thing. We don't know if there's a universe where we can assume there's a universe where the pandemic doesn't happen and we don't get this match. This match is an entirety. I don't want to necessarily it's something that if you take it away, it's not going to leave a hole. If you do take away United Kingdom wrestling crowds, yes, you're going to find it elsewhere in places like Chicago and places like Puerto Rico and international crowds, but you're still taking away a big chunk of wrestling history.
It's true. UK crowd, and actually UK in general, historically has meant a lot to professional wrestling. However, what you actually just said, Coby, about, in an alternate universe, the pandemic not existing, well, that would mean in an alternate universe, the Firefly Funhouse match would not exist. And that actually kind of makes it feel ever so slightly more special to me. So while both of these could go in wrestling heaven, and I'd, on a normal day, be happy to put either of them in it, I am sending the Firefly Funhouse match to wrestling heaven. So David wins this week's show 3-1, and that brings us to the end of the episode, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Coby, and thank you to David for joining us here today. We'll be back here the same time tomorrow for Mailbag Monday. Thank you, guys. If you're on Spotify, please leave 5-star and follow. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe and like. And remember to follow us here at Wrestling Republic with fans, for the fans, without the dirt. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Enjoy.